Hi, I'm Emma Rodriguez. And last Tuesday changed everything. Picture this. You walk into what you think is a casual family dinner, only to discover it's actually a boardroom coup designed to strip you of the construction empire you spent 8 years building with your bare hands. My brother Carlos looked me straight in the eye and said, "We're voting you out. You're done." What he didn't realize was that, while he'd been plotting my downfall for months, I'd been 3 steps ahead, documenting every lie, every stolen dollar, and every illegal move they'd made. By the time that meeting ended, I wasn't just back in control. I owned everything, and suddenly my entire family worked for me. This isn't just about business. This is about what happens when the people you trust most decide you're worth more to them, gone than present. It's about discovering that blood doesn't guarantee loyalty, but contracts do guarantee consequences. And it's about learning that sometimes the best way to save your family is to fire them. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My alarm buzzed at 5:30 on that Tuesday morning, just like it had every day for the past 8 years. I rolled out of bed in my small apartment in downtown Denver, made my coffee and checked the weather app. 62 degrees and clear skies, perfect for the concrete pour we had scheduled at the Henderson project site. I had no idea that by sunset my entire world would be turned upside down. I've always been an early riser, but not by choice initially. When you're building a construction company from scratch as a 25-year-old woman in a field dominated by men twice your age, you learn quickly that showing up first and leaving last isn't just dedication. It's survival. Every morning I'd arrive at our offices on Blake Street while the city was still quiet, using those silent hours to review contracts, plan schedules, and prepare for whatever crisis might emerge during the day. Rodriguez Construction started in my garage with nothing but a beat-up Ford pickup truck I'd bought with my tax refund and a contractor's license I'd earned while working nights at Home Depot. I remember the day I got that license. I was so excited I called my dad immediately, expecting congratulations. Instead, he sighed heavily and said, "Mija, construction is a man's world. Why don't you let your brother Carlos handle the business side? You could do the books, maybe manage the office." But I didn't want to manage an office. I wanted to build things. I wanted to see empty lots transform into family homes, to turn architectural dreams into concrete reality. There's something magical about watching a foundation get poured, knowing that what you're creating will shelter families for generations. That feeling, that purpose, it's what drove me through 18-hour days, through clients who questioned whether a woman could handle their projects, through bank loan officers who wanted to speak to my husband instead of me. The first year was brutal. I lived on ramen noodles and determination, sleeping in my truck between job sites to save on gas money. I wore my hair in a tight ponytail, kept my voice steady and professional, and learned to fix equipment failures with YouTube videos and stubborn persistence. Slowly, one satisfied customer at a time, Rodriguez Construction began to grow. By year 3, I'd hired my first employees, 2 experienced framers named Mike and Dave, who treated me like the boss I'd earned the right to be. By year 5, we were handling multiple projects simultaneously, and I'd moved into our first real office space. The company that started in my garage now employed 15 people and had contracts worth over $2 million. That's when my family started paying attention. Carlos was the first to come around. He'd been bouncing between failed ventures. First a real estate investment scheme that collapsed when the market shifted, then a food truck business that never quite found its footing. When he approached me about joining Rodriguez Construction, I was hesitant. Carlos had always been the golden child, the one my parents expected would be the family's success story. But he'd also always been the one who took shortcuts, who promised more than he could deliver. Still, he was my older brother, and when he looked me in the eye and said he wanted to help me take the company to the next level, I believed him. I gave him equity and made him our director of business development. Within 6 months, our revenue had doubled. Carlos had a gift for relationships, for making clients feel heard and valued. I thought we made a perfect team. Me handling the technical side, him managing the client relationship. Maria joined us a year later, fresh out of college with a marketing degree and big ideas about social media presence and brand building. She was enthusiastic, creative, and she understood the digital landscape in ways that completely mystified me. Under her guidance, our Instagram following grew from 300 to 15,000. Our website went from basic contact information to a polished showcase of our best projects. New clients started finding us online instead of just through word-of-mouth referral. I gave Maria equity too, along with the title of marketing director. Watching my little sister's ideas come to life, seeing her confidence grow as she took ownership of her role, it felt like everything I'd worked for was finally coming together. Rodriguez Construction wasn't just my company anymore, it was becoming a true family business. The last piece fell into place when Uncle Roberto retired from his accounting firm and offered to help with our book. Roberto had always been the family's financial wizard, the one who did everyone's taxes and gave advice about investments. Having him manage our finances felt like adding the final layer of professionalism we needed to compete with the bigger construction firm. I restructured the company to accommodate everyone's roles, creating clear divisions of responsibility. I remained president and kept majority ownership, but Carlos, Maria, and Roberto each held equity stakes that reflected their contribution. We moved into a larger office space in the Lodo district, complete with a conference room for client meetings and individual offices for each department head. For 2 years, everything seemed perfect. Our revenue grew consistently, our reputation in the Denver market solidified, and our family dynamic felt natural and productive. We'd have dinner every Sunday at my mother's house, talking about upcoming projects and celebrating our wins. I felt like I'd achieved something my parents never thought possible. I'd built a successful business that provided good jobs for people I loved. But success, I learned, can blind you to the hairline cracks forming in your foundation. The first sign something was wrong came during our quarterly review meeting last spring. I'd been going over our profit margins, which had been slowly declining despite increased revenue. When I asked Roberto about it, he waved his hand dismissively and said the numbers reflected normal growing pains, higher insurance costs, equipment depreciation, the overhead of our expanded office space. It made sense on the surface, but something nagged at me. I'd built this company by paying attention to details, by questioning everything until I understood it completely. The math wasn't adding up the way it should have, but Roberto had 30 years of accounting experience, and I trusted his expertise over my instincts. The second sign was more subtle. Carlos had started taking phone calls he wouldn't explain, stepping outside the office or closing his door when certain calls came in. When I asked about it, he'd say they were potential clients who preferred confidentiality during initial discussions. Again, it sounded reasonable. High-end residential clients often wanted discretion, especially when dealing with sensitive renovations or additions. Maria's behavior shifted too, though in ways that were harder to pinpoint. She'd always been social and outgoing, but she started having lunch meetings with people she described vaguely as industry contacts or networking opportunities. She'd come back from these meetings energized but secretive, diving into her work with an intensity that seemed different somehow. The third sign should have been impossible to miss, but family trust has a way of creating blind spots. I started noticing Maria in the office during off hours, evenings, when she claimed to be working on social media content, weekends when she said she needed quiet time to plan campaign. I'd find filing cabinet drawers slightly ajar, papers on my desk arranged differently than I'd left them, and my computer showing recent activity I didn't remember. When I asked her about it, she had perfectly reasonable explanation. She was developing a comprehensive marketing strategy that required reviewing our project history. She was creating client testimonials and needed access to contract details for accurate description. She was researching our competition and wanted to understand how our pricing compared to other firms. Every explanation made sense individually, but collectively they painted a picture I wasn't ready to see. My little sister, the one I'd mentored and supported, was systematically documenting everything about our business operations. At the time, I convinced myself she was just being thorough, maybe even preparing a presentation about our growth strategy. I should have trusted my instinct. I should have asked harder questions. But when you've built something with people you love, The idea that they might be working against you feels impossible to accept. The final warning came in the form of a casual conversation with our equipment supplier, Jerry Martinez. I'd known Jerry for 6 years. He'd sold me my first commercial-grade tools when I was still operating out of my garage. During a routine delivery, he mentioned something that stopped me cold. "Your brother's been asking a lot of questions about equipment leasing lately," Jerry said as we signed the delivery receipt. "Sounds like you guys might be expanding into a second location or something. That's exciting." I kept my expression neutral, but my mind was racing. Carlos hadn't mentioned anything about expansion plans to me. We'd never discussed a second location or additional equipment leasing. When I asked Carlos about it later, he said he'd been exploring options for potential future growth. Nothing concrete, just preliminary research. But Jerry's comment planted a seed of doubt that began growing despite my efforts to ignore it. Why would Carlos be researching expansion without including me in those conversations? Why would he be talking to suppliers about equipment we hadn't budgeted for or approved? That night I lay awake staring at the ceiling of my apartment, replaying months of small moments that had felt slightly off. The phone calls, the lunch meetings, the after-hours office visits, the questions about expansion, individually explainable but together forming a pattern I couldn't ignore anymore. I thought about the company I'd built, about the equity I'd shared, about the trust I'd placed in the people I loved most. I thought about my father's words from years ago: "Construction is a man's world." Had I been naive to think that family would be different? Had I given away too much control in my eagerness to include the people I cared about? The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of confronting my suspicions directly, I decided to investigate them quietly. If I was wrong, if my paranoia was unfounded, I'd owe my family an apology and some serious self-reflection about trust and communication. But if I was right, if the people I'd trusted with my life's work were planning something behind my back, I needed to be prepared. I needed evidence, documentation, and most importantly, I needed to understand exactly what I was up against before I made any moves. That decision to investigate instead of confront saved my company, because what I discovered over the following weeks was worse than anything I could have imagined. The people I'd trusted most hadn't just been keeping secrets from me, they'd been actively planning to destroy everything I'd built, and they'd been using my own generosity and trust as weapons against me. The Tuesday that changed everything was still 2 months away, but the real battle had already begun. I just didn't know it yet. The decision to hire a private investigator felt like crossing a line I never thought I'd have to cross. Sitting in my apartment that Thursday evening, laptop open to a Google search for Denver private investigators, I felt like I was betraying everything I believed about family loyalty. But Jerry Martinez's comment about Carlos asking equipment suppliers questions had been gnawing at me for 3 days. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. And I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental was happening behind my back. I found Janet Walsh through online reviews and a referral from my attorney, Patricia Sims, who I'd worked with on various contract negotiations over the years. Janet's website was professional but understated exactly what I needed. Her background included 15 years with the Denver Police Department's Financial Crimes Division before starting her own investigative firm. When I called her office, her assistant scheduled a meeting for the following Monday. Janet's office was located in a modest building near the courthouse, nothing flashy or dramatic like you see in movies. She was probably 50, with graying hair and sharp eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of my appearance as I walked in. Her handshake was firm, and she gestured for me to sit in a comfortable chair across from her desk. "Tell me what's concerning you, Miss Rodriguez," she said, pulling out a yellow legal pad and a pen. I explained the situation as objectively as I could: the declining profit margins despite increased revenue, Carlos's mysterious phone calls, Maria's after-hours presence in the office, the equipment supplier question. As I spoke, Janet took notes without interrupting, occasionally nodding or asking for clarification on dates or details. "What I'm hearing," she said when I finished, "is that you have suspicions but no concrete evidence of wrongdoing. That's actually the perfect time to bring in someone like me. If there's nothing to find, you'll have peace of mind. If there is something to find, we'll document it properly. She explained her process methodically. Financial forensics to trace any unusual money movements, surveillance to understand the scope of any outside activities, and digital investigation to recover deleted files or communications. Her fee was reasonable, and more importantly, she emphasized discretion and documentation above all else. Whatever we find, if we find anything, will be legally admissible, she assured me. I've testified in dozens of financial fraud cases. If this goes anywhere beyond family drama, you'll be prepared. I signed her contract that afternoon and wrote her a check for the retainer. Walking back to my truck, I felt simultaneously relieved and guilty. Relieved because I was finally taking action instead of drowning in suspicion. Guilty because I was essentially spying on my own family. The first week of Janet's investigation was torture. I went through the motions of normal business operations while constantly wondering what she might be discovering. Every interaction with Carlos, Maria, and Roberto felt loaded with hidden meaning. When Carlos took one of his mysterious phone calls, I found myself straining to hear fragments of conversation. When Maria stayed late to work on social media content, I wondered what files she might be accessing. Janet called me the following Friday afternoon with an update. I need to meet with you in person, she said. Can you come to my office this evening? And Miss Rodriguez, you might want to prepare yourself. What I've found so far is concerning. The drive to Janet's office felt like the longest 20 minutes of my life. I parked outside her building and sat in my truck for a few minutes, steeling myself for whatever she was about to tell me. The rational part of my mind still hoped she'd found nothing more than innocent explanations for my family's behavior. But my gut told me I was about to learn something that would change everything. Janet's office was dimly lit when I arrived, just her desk lamp and the glow from her computer screen. She had several manila folders spread across her desk, along with printed bank statements and what looked like surveillance photographs. Sit down, Emma, she said gently. What I'm about to show you is going to be difficult to process. She opened the first folder and spread out a series of bank statements. These are from Rodriguez Construction's operating account. Notice anything unusual about the pattern of withdrawals over the past 6 months? I studied the statements carefully. Our normal operating expenses were predictable: payroll, supplier payments, insurance, equipment leases. But there were other withdrawals I didn't recognize, ranging from $500 to $3,000, always made on different days of the week, always for amounts that wouldn't immediately flag as suspicious. I don't recognize these, I said, pointing to several withdrawals. Roberto handles most of our banking, but these amounts should have required my approval. Janet nodded. That's because they were processed using a signature card that was filed without your knowledge. Your uncle has been authorized to make withdrawals up to $5,000 without additional approval. My stomach dropped. I never signed anything authorizing that. I know, but someone did sign it, using a very good forgery of your signature. She handed me a copy of the bank authorization form. The signature looked like mine, but I knew I'd never seen this document before. Janet opened a second folder. This gets worse. Those withdrawals weren't random. They correspond exactly to deposits made into 3 separate personal accounts, one belonging to Carlos, one to Maria, and one to Roberto. She showed me copies of the deposit record. The amounts matched perfectly, always deposited within 24 hours of being withdrawn from the company account. Over 6 months, they'd taken nearly $40,000. This is embezzlement, I said quietly, the word feeling foreign in my mouth when applied to my own family. It is, but there's more. Janet opened a third folder containing what looked like corporate documents. Your brother has filed incorporation papers for a new company, Rodriguez Construction LLC. Notice the subtle difference. Your company is Rodriguez Construction. The new entity is designed to create confusion in the marketplace. I stared at the incorporation documents, seeing Carlos listed as president and registered agent, with Maria as secretary and Roberto as treasurer. The business purpose was listed as general construction and development services, exactly what my company did. They can't use the Rodriguez name, I protested. That's trademark infringement. Technically, they can use the family name for a different business entity, especially if they're not using your exact company name or logo. It's legally gray area that would take months to resolve in court, during which time they could potentially operate and steal clients. Janet pulled out another set of documents, But this is where it gets really problematic. I've been monitoring their digital communications, and they've been having regular video conferences to plan what they're calling the transition. They're not just planning to start a competing business, they're planning to dissolve your company and transfer all your assets to theirs. She turned her laptop screen toward me and played an audio recording. I recognized Carlos's voice immediately, followed by Maria and Roberto. The key is timing, Carlos was saying. We call a family meeting, presented as a restructuring for efficiency. Emma's been overwhelmed lately anyway. This gives her a graceful exit from day-to-day operations. What about the clients? Maria's voice asked. Already handled, Roberto replied. I've been having conversations with our top 5 accounts. They're comfortable with the transition as long as project continuity is maintained. And the equipment, Carlos again. Lease transfers are straightforward, Roberto said. The trucks, tools, office space, it all moves to the new entity. Emma keeps a small ownership stake for her contributions, but operational control transfers to us. My hands were shaking as Janet stopped the recording. When was this recorded? 3 days ago. There's more, and they've been systematically copying your client files, contract templates, supplier contacts, essentially everything they'd need to replicate your business operation. She showed me surveillance photos of Maria entering our office building on a Saturday morning, leaving 3 hours later with a box of files. Another photo showed Carlos meeting with Tom Henderson, our biggest client, at a coffee shop downtown. The Henderson meeting was particularly interesting, Janet continued. I was able to position myself close enough to hear most of their conversation. Carlos told Tom that you were considering retirement and that he wanted to ensure a smooth transition of their project to new management. The betrayal was so comprehensive, so calculated, that I felt physically ill. These weren't impulsive decisions or momentary lapses in judgment. This was a months-long conspiracy to steal my life's work, executed by the people I'd trusted most. There's one more thing, Janet said softly, and this might be the most important piece. She handed me a printed email exchange between Carlos and someone named Brandon Mueller, who appeared to be an attorney. The subject line read, Asset Protection Strategy. In the email, Carlos asked about the best way to minimize exposure during a business restructuring that might involve resistance from a minority partner. The attorney's response was chilling in its clinical detail, outlining strategies for isolating assets, controlling cash flow, and managing potential legal challenges from displaced ownership. Carlos has been getting legal advice on how to push you out while protecting themselves from liability, Janet explained. This isn't just family drama or business disagreement, this is premeditated corporate theft. I sat in Janet's office for another hour going through every piece of evidence she'd gathered. Bank records showing systematic embezzlement, surveillance photos documenting theft of company property, audio recordings revealing their conspiracy, legal consultations about asset protection strategies. It painted a picture of betrayal so complete that I struggled to process it emotionally. What happens now? I finally asked. That depends on what you want to achieve, Janet replied. We have enough evidence to file criminal charges for embezzlement and theft of trade secret. We also have grounds for civil litigation to recover stolen funds and prevent them from using your business model. But pursuing criminal charges against your family will destroy any possibility of reconciliation, and civil litigation can be expensive and time-consuming, with no guarantee of recovering your losses. I thought about Carlos's voice on that recording, so casual and confident as he discussed dismantling everything I'd built. I thought about Maria copying my files, about Roberto forging my signature, about all of them lying to my face for months while systematically stealing from me. There's a third option, Janet continued. We document everything thoroughly, then we wait for them to make their move. When they call that family meeting, you'll be prepared with evidence of their crimes. That gives you maximum leverage to protect your company, and potentially avoid destroying family relationships entirely. You think they'll actually call a meeting? Based on their recorded conversations, they're planning to present their takeover as a restructuring within the next few weeks. They want to make it seem like a reasonable business decision rather than a hostile takeover. I left Janet's office that night with copies of all the evidence and a plan for the next phase of investigation. She would continue monitoring their communications and documenting any additional criminal activity. I would act normally, while secretly preparing for the confrontation I now knew was coming. The drive home was surreal.
The city lights blurred past my windshield as I tried to reconcile the evidence I'd just seen with the family relationships I'd cherished for years. How long had they been planning this? How many family dinners had I sat through while they were plotting against me? How many times had they smiled at me, hugged me, told me they were proud of what we'd built together, all while systematically working to destroy me? But underneath the hurt and betrayal, something else was growing. Determination. They thought they were dealing with the same trusting, generous Emma who'd given them equity and authority without hesitation. They had no idea that I'd spent the past month learning exactly what they were planning, documenting their crimes and preparing for war. If they wanted to play hardball, I was about to show them what a woman who'd built a construction company from nothing could do when she put her mind to protecting what was her. Part 3, Building the Counteroffensive. The weeks following Janet's revelations were the most challenging of my life, requiring me to maintain a facade of normalcy while every interaction with my family felt like performance art. I had to sit through Sunday dinners at my mother's house, smiling and making small talk about upcoming projects, all while knowing that Carlos, Maria and Roberto were actively working to destroy everything I'd spent 8 years building. But I wasn't just acting normal, I was building my own strategy. If they thought they could outmaneuver me through months of careful planning, they were about to discover that the woman who'd turned a garage startup into a multi-million-dollar construction company had learned a thing or two about strategic thinking. My first priority was securing our most valuable assets. The Monday after meeting with Janet, I scheduled a private appointment with our primary banker, Michelle Torres, who'd been handling Rodriguez Construction's accounts since our third year of operation. Michelle had watched our company grow from a small contractor to a significant player in the Denver market, and she'd always been supportive of my leadership. I need to restructure our account access and approval processes, I told Michelle during our meeting. We're growing rapidly, and I want to ensure better financial controls are in place. Michelle nodded professionally. That's smart business practice. What changes are you looking to implement? I want to remove Roberto Rodriguez's signature authority and require dual approval for any withdrawals over $500, I said. Also, I'd like to establish a separate account for major equipment purchases and client retainers. Any particular reason for the urgency? Michelle asked, and I could tell she was picking up on something in my tone. Let's just say I've identified some gaps in our financial oversight that need immediate attention, I replied carefully. Michelle processed the paperwork that afternoon, and by the end of the week, Roberto's ability to access company funds was effectively eliminated. When he asked me about it the following Monday, I told him it was a requirement from our insurance company for better financial control. He seemed annoyed but didn't push the issue, probably because he didn't want to draw attention to his unauthorized withdrawals. My second priority was protecting our intellectual property and client relationship. Over the next 2 weeks, I systematically backed up every file on our shared server, copied all physical client documents, and secured our most sensitive information in a safety deposit box at a different bank. I also reached out to our top clients under the guise of routine relationship maintenance, subtly reinforcing my role as company president and primary contact. The conversation with Tom Henderson was particularly revealing. When I called to check on the progress of his family's custom home project, he mentioned something that confirmed Janet's surveillance reports. You know, Emma, your brother Carlos stopped by for coffee last week, Tom said casually. Nice guy. He was telling me about some exciting changes coming to your company structure. I kept my voice steady. Oh really? What kind of changes did he mention? Something about you transitioning to more of an advisory role so you could focus on the big picture. He said the day-to-day operations were getting pretty demanding. That's interesting, I replied. Carlos sometimes gets ahead of himself with ideas we're still discussing internally. Right now, I'm very much focused on hands-on leadership and ensuring projects like yours receive my personal attention.
Good to hear, Tom said. No offense to Carlos, but we hired Rodriguez Construction because of your reputation and expertise. As long as you're running the show, we're happy. After hanging up, I immediately called our other major clients with similar check-in conversations. The pattern was consistent. Carlos had been positioning himself as the future leader while portraying me as someone who was overwhelmed and ready to step back. It was a sophisticated manipulation designed to make our clients comfortable with the transition he was planning. My third priority was the most complex, understanding the legal implications of what they were planning, and ensuring I had maximum leverage when the confrontation finally came. Patricia Sims, my attorney, had recommended a corporate litigation specialist named David Chen, who had extensive experience with business partnership disputes and fiduciary duty violations. David's office was in the financial district, occupying 2 floors of a glass tower with views of the mountains. His reputation was intimidating. Harvard Law School, 15 years at a white shoe firm, a track record of wins in high-stakes business litigation. But when we met, he was surprisingly down-to-earth and strategic in his thinking. "What you're describing constitutes several serious crimes," David said after reviewing Janet's evidence. "Embezzlement, theft of trade secrets, conspiracy to commit fraud, and potentially racketeering if we can prove this was an ongoing criminal enterprise." "What about the corporate aspect?" I asked. "If they actually try to dissolve Rodriguez Construction and transfer assets to their new company, that would be breach of fiduciary duty on multiple levels," David explained. "As equity holders, they have a legal obligation to act in the company's best interests. Planning to destroy the company for personal gain is textbook breach of fiduciary duty." David walked me through various scenarios for how this might play out legally. The criminal charges were straightforward. We had evidence of financial crimes that could result in felony conviction. The civil litigation was more complex, but potentially more powerful in terms of protecting my company and recovering damages. "The key is timing," David emphasized. "If we move too early, they might destroy evidence or flee. If we wait too long, they might succeed in their takeover and make recovery more difficult. What do you recommend?" "Let them call their meeting. Let them present their plan, document everything they say, get it on record, then hit them with everything we have. They'll be so confident in their strategy that they'll likely make additional incriminating statements during the confrontation." David also explained something that would prove crucial later: the concept of piercing the corporate veil. Because Carlos, Maria, and Roberto had been using Rodriguez Construction as their personal piggy bank, and because they were planning to fraudulently transfer assets to their new company, a court could potentially hold them personally liable for all company debts and obligations. "Basically," David said, "if they want to play games with corporate structures, we can use those same structures against them. They could end up personally responsible for every dollar your company owes, including equipment loans, supplier debts, and employee obligations." The fourth element of my strategy was the most emotionally difficult: maintaining normal family relationships while knowing what I knew. This meant attending Sunday dinners, participating in casual conversations, and responding to their friendly texts and calls as if nothing had changed. The hardest part was watching my mother, who had no idea what was happening. She'd beam with pride when Carlos talked about exciting developments at the company, or when Maria showed her our latest social media post. Mom had worked 2 jobs to support us when we were kids, and seeing her children succeed in business together was obviously one of her greatest joys. I knew that whatever happened in the coming confrontation would likely shatter that joy, and the guilt of that knowledge was almost unbearable. But I also knew that allowing Carlos, Maria, and Roberto to steal my company would ultimately hurt her more, especially when the criminal charges became public. During one particularly difficult Sunday dinner, Carlos made a comment that crystallized my resolve. We were discussing a new municipal contract bid that Rodriguez Construction was pursuing, and Carlos suggested that maybe it was time to think bigger about our company structure. "What do you mean, Mom?" "Well, Emma's been carrying a heavy load for years," Carlos said, glancing at me with what looked like genuine concern. "Maybe it's time to distribute responsibilities more evenly. Let her focus on the creative side while others handle the business operations." "That sounds wonderful," Mom said. "Emma, you've been working so hard for so long. It would be nice if you could step back and enjoy some of the success you've created." I smiled and nodded, but inside I was furious. Carlos was using our mother's love and concern for me as a weapon, manipulating her into supporting his takeover by framing it as being good for my well-being. It was psychological manipulation at its most sophisticated. and it made me realize just how calculated and ruthless his planning had been. That night, I called Janet to check on the latest surveillance reports. "They're accelerating their timeline," she told me. "I recorded another conversation yesterday, where Carlos said they need to initiate the restructuring within the next 2 weeks. Any indication of when they'll call the meeting?" Carlos mentioned something about waiting until after the Henderson project milestone payment comes through. "That's scheduled for this Thursday, right?" I checked my calendar. The Henderson payment was indeed due Thursday. A substantial progress payment that would bring nearly $60,000 into our operating account. They want to make sure there's money to steal before they make their move. I realized, that's my assessment. I'd expect them to call the meeting for early next week. The prediction proved accurate. The following Monday morning, I was reviewing project schedules when my phone buzzed with a text from Carlos. "Family meeting tonight, 6 p.m. Mom's house, important business matters to discuss." The casual tone of the message, the lack of any agenda or explanation, the presumption that I would simply show up when summoned, it perfectly encapsulated the arrogance that had driven them to believe they could steal my company without consequence. I forwarded the message to Janet and David, then spent the rest of the day preparing for what I knew would be the most important confrontation of my life. I gathered copies of all the evidence Janet had compiled, organized them into folders for easy reference, and mentally rehearsed the key points I needed to make. That evening, as I drove to my mother's house, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. 8 years ago, I'd been a young woman with more dreams than money, sleeping in my truck between job sites and living on determination and ramen noodles. Now I was driving to confront my own family members who'd tried to steal the empire I'd built from nothing. The irony wasn't lost on me. They thought they were calling a meeting to vote me out of my own company. What they didn't realize was that they were actually walking into a trap 8 months in the making. And by the end of the evening, they wouldn't just be out of Rodriguez construction, they'd be facing criminal charges and personal financial ruin. I parked outside Mom's house and sat in my truck for a moment, steeling myself for what was about to happen. Everything I'd worked for, everything I'd built, everything I'd dreamed of when I was 25 and naive enough to think I could succeed in construction. It all came down to the next few hours. Time to find out who really owned Rodriguez Construction. Part 4. The trap is set. Walking up the familiar path to my mother's front door, I carried a leather portfolio that contained 8 months of evidence documenting my family's betrayal. The weight of those documents felt symbolic. Proof that trust once broken becomes something heavy you have to carry until you decide what to do with it. Mom answered the door with her usual warm smile, completely unaware that her dining room was about to become the site of a corporate war. "Emma, Misha, come in. Everyone's already here." The scene in the dining room was arranged like a tribunal. Carlos sat at the head of the table where Dad used to sit, with a thick folder of documents spread in front of him. Maria had her laptop open, the screen angled so I couldn't see what she was working on. Uncle Roberto wore his reading glasses, and had what appeared to be financial statements arranged in neat piles. Mom had set out coffee and her homemade churros as if this were just another family gathering instead of an attempted corporate coup. The domestic normalcy of it all, the familiar smell of her coffee, the sound of the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, the family photos lining the walls, made the betrayal feel even more surreal. "Sit down, Emma," Carlos said without looking up from his document. His tone was businesslike, authoritative in a way that immediately set my teeth on edge. This was my brother who'd asked me for help when his own ventures failed. Now presuming to take control of the company I'd built, I remained standing. "Before we start, I'm curious about something. What exactly is the purpose of this meeting?" Carlos finally looked at me, his expression patient but condescending. "We need to discuss the future of Rodriguez Construction. The company has grown beyond what any one person can effectively manage." "Interesting perspective," I replied, setting my portfolio on the table but not sitting down. "And you've all been discussing this among yourselves?" Maria cleared her throat, We've been concerned about you, Em. You've been working 16-hour days, dealing with all the stress of management, handling client relationships, overseeing projects. It's not sustainable. So this is about my well-being. Partly Roberto chimed in, adjusting his glass, but it's also about efficiency and professional growth. We think the company would benefit from more distributed leadership. I nodded slowly, as if considering their words. More distributed leadership. And what would that look like exactly? Carlos leaned back in his chair, confidence radiating from every gesture. I would take over as president and CEO, handling day-to-day operations and client relationships. Maria would become VP of Marketing and Business Development. Roberto would serve as CFO with expanded financial authority. And me? You'd retain the title of founder and serve as a senior advisor, Carlos said smoothly. You'd have input on major decisions, but you'd be free from the daily operational burden. Think of it as a promotion to a more strategic role. The audacity was breathtaking. They were presenting theft as a favor, describing my removal from operational control as career advancement. I wondered how many hours they'd spent crafting this narrative, polishing the language to make corporate robbery sound like thoughtful restructuring. That's very generous, I said, but I have a few questions about the details. Of course, Carlos replied, glancing at Maria and Roberto with the satisfied look of someone whose plan was proceeding perfectly. First, what happens to the equity structure? Do I retain my current ownership percent? Roberto consulted his papers. We're proposing a redistribution that reflects current contributions and operational responsibilities. Your equity would be adjusted to 25%. With voting rights proportional to your new advisory role. So they wanted to steal my majority ownership along with operational control. My 51% would become 25%, effectively making me a minority shareholder in my own company. And the 75% would be distributed. Carlos would hold 35% as president and CEO. Roberto continued. Maria would hold 25%. And I would hold 15% as CFO. Interesting math, I observed. And this redistribution would be based on what valuation of the company? Carlos shifted slightly in his chair. We've had preliminary discussions with a business appraiser. Based on current assets and revenue projections, we're looking at approximately $1.2 million for the total company value. I almost laughed. Our equipment alone was worth more than $2 million. And our annual revenue was approaching $3 million. They were planning to steal my company by artificially deflating its value, then redistributing equity based on that fraudulent assessment. Before we go any further, I said, opening my portfolio, I think there are some things we need to discuss. Carlos frowned. What kind of things? I pulled out the first set of documents, bank statements showing the unauthorized withdrawals Roberto had been making for months. Let's start with these. Roberto, can you explain these withdrawals from our operating account? The color drained from Roberto's face as he recognized the statements. Those are routine operational expenses. Really? Because they correspond exactly to deposits made into personal accounts belonging to you, Carlos and Maria. I spread out the matching deposit records. $43,000 over 6 months. Transferred from company funds to personal accounts without authorization. Maria's laptop screen suddenly became very interesting to her. Carlos's confident demeanor cracked slightly, but he rallied quickly. If there were accounting irregularities, we can discuss them separately, he said. This meeting is about strategic restructuring, not bookkeeping detail. Oh, but this is very much about strategic restructuring, I replied, pulling out more documents, especially when that restructuring involves incorporating a competing business designed to steal our clients and assets. I placed the incorporation papers for Rodriguez Construction LLC on the table. Carlos, would you like to explain why you filed these documents without informing me? The silence in the room was deafening. Mom stopped moving around the kitchen and came to stand in the doorway, sensing that something was seriously wrong. That's a preliminary filing, Carlos said weakly. We were exploring options for potential expansion. Expansion. I pulled out transcripts of the recorded conversations Janet had captured. Is that what you call planning to dissolve Rodriguez Construction Inc. and transfer all our assets to your new company? I began reading from the transcript. The key is time. We call a family meeting presented as a restructuring for efficiency. Emma's been overwhelmed lately anyway. This gives her a graceful exit from day-to-day operations. Carlos's face went white. Where did you get that? From the same source that provided these, I said, placing surveillance photos on the table. Pictures of Maria removing confidential client files from our office, audio recordings of you meeting with our clients to discuss transition, documentation of Roberto forging my signature on bank authorization forms. Roberto was literally shaking now. Emma, you don't understand the full situation. Oh, I understand perfectly, I interrupted. You've been systematically stealing from the company I built, planning to destroy it through fraudulent means, and attempting to manipulate me into voluntarily surrendering control through lies and emotional manipulation. Mom stepped fully into the dining room, her face pale with confusion and growing horror. What's happening here? What are you all talking about? I turned to face her, my heart breaking for what this was about to do to her. Mom, Carlos, Maria and Roberto have been embezzling money from Rodriguez Construction and planning to steal the entire company through corporate fraud. That's not true, Maria said desperately. Emma, you're misunderstanding. Really? I pulled out the email exchanges with the attorney, then explained these emails, where Carlos seeks legal advice on minimizing exposure during a business restructuring involving resistance from a minority partner. I read the attorney's response aloud. The key is controlling cash flow and isolating assets before the displaced partner can seek legal counsel. Documentation should emphasize the voluntary nature of any leadership transition. The room was silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock. Mom sank into a chair, staring at her children as if seeing us for the first time. This is elaborate theft, I continued, planned over months, executed through forgery, embezzlement, and fraud. And now you want to complete it by forcing me to accept a 25% stake in my own company, valued at an artificially low price you've manipulated to maximize your theft. Carlos tried one last, desperate play. Even if there were irregularities in our approach, the fundamental idea is sound. The company needs new leadership. The company needs new ownership. He interrupted, which brings me to the most important thing you forgot to consider during your months of planning. I pulled out the final set of documents, corporate filings for Rodriguez Holdings, property deeds, equipment titles and trademark registrations. Rodriguez Construction Inc. doesn't actually own anything, I said calmly. The trucks, the tools, the office building, the equipment, even our company name. It's all owned by Rodriguez Holdings LLC. I spread the ownership documents across the table. A company I created 3 years ago for tax optimization purposes. A company where I hold 100% ownership. Rodriguez Construction Inc. is essentially a subsidiary that leases everything from Rodriguez Holdings. The implications hit them like a physical blow. Carlos stared at the documents, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Maria's face had gone completely white. Roberto looked like he might be sick. So let me explain how this actually works, I continued. You can vote me out of Rodriguez Construction Inc. all you want, but without equipment, without an office, without the legal right to use the Rodriguez name. What exactly would you be controlling? A corporate shell with no assets and mounting liabilities. Mom's voice was barely a whisper. Emma, is this true? Did they really steal from you? I looked at my mother, this woman who'd worked 2 jobs to support us, who'd been so proud to see her children building something together. Yes, Mom, they stole money. They stole business plans. They stole client information. And they were planning to steal the entire company. But you still own everything. I own everything that matters, I confirmed, which means I have a choice to make about what happens next. The silence stretched until Carlos finally found his voice. What do you want, Emma?
I looked around the table at the three people who'd betrayed me most completely, who'd taken my trust and generosity and turned them into weapons against me. What I want, I said quietly, is for you to understand that actions have consequences, and your actions over the past 8 months have been criminal. I pulled out my phone and showed them the contact information for Detective Morrison, who Janet had connected me with weeks earlier. I have enough evidence to file felony charges against all three of you. Embezzlement, theft of trade secrets, conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery. We're talking about multiple years in federal prison. Roberto was crying now. Emma, please, we're family. Family doesn't steal from family. I replied, family doesn't lie, manipulate and conspire to destroy what their own blood built from nothing. Carlos made one final attempt to salvage the situation. Look, if there were mistakes made, we can fix them. We can return any money that was inappropriately transferred. $43,000. Plus interest, I said. Immediately, plus the cost of the private investigator I hired to document your crimes, plus damages for the business relationships you've damaged through your unauthorized client contacts. And then what? Maria asked desperately. I closed my portfolio and looked at each of them in turn, and then, we'll see if you've learned anything about consequences. The meeting that was supposed to end with my removal from Rodriguez Construction was about to end very differently. They'd called this gathering to vote me out. But as I looked at their faces, pale, desperate, finally understanding the scope of their miscalculation, I realized they'd actually voted themselves out of everything. The only question now was whether they understood just how completely they'd lost. Part 5. The Reckoning. The silence in my mother's dining room stretched until it became uncomfortable, broken only by Roberto's quiet sniffling and the persistent ticking of the grandfather clock. I stood at the head of the table looking down at three people who'd spent months planning my downfall, and were now facing the complete destruction of their scheme. Carlos recovered first, his mind already working to find some angle, some leverage he could use to salvage the situation. Okay, Emma, you've made your point. We made mistakes, but we're family. Surely we can work something out without involving the police. Mistakes, I repeated. Carlos, you forged my signature. You embezzled $43,000. You planned to steal my entire company. These weren't mistakes. They were felonies. Maria looked up from her laptop screen, tears starting to form in her eyes. Emma, please, I was just following Carlos's lead. I thought it was legitimate restructuring. The moment Maria tried to claim ignorance about copying confidential files, something inside me snapped. You thought copying client contracts at 2 in the morning was legitimate restructuring. You thought photographing proprietary pricing formulas was standard business practice. I pulled out the surveillance photos Janet had taken, spreading them across the table like playing cards. Here you are, Maria, leaving our office on a Saturday with boxes of files. Here's another one of you photographing the contents of my locked filing cabinet. And this one shows you meeting with our competitor, Jackson Construction, the day after you copied our bid strategies. Maria's face crumpled as she saw the photographic evidence of her theft. I never gave anything to Jackson Construction. Those were just informational meetings, where you discussed our upcoming bid submissions and client relationship strategies. I countered, pulling out another transcript. Would you like me to read what their estimator said about the helpful insights you provided about our cost structure? Uncle Roberto finally looked up from his hands, his voice barely audible. Emma, we never meant for it to go this far. Carlos convinced us that you were overwhelmed, that the company was suffering because you couldn't handle the growth. The company was suffering because you were stealing from it. I shot back. Our profit margins declined because you were siphoning money. Our cash flow problems existed because you were paying yourselves unauthorized bonuses with forged authorization. I turned to Carlos, who was still trying to maintain some semblance of control over the situation. And you, dear brother, convinced them I was incompetent while you were actively sabotaging the business you claim I couldn't handle. That's not just theft. That's psychological warfare. Mom finally found her voice, though it came out as a whisper. Carlos, tell me Emma is wrong. Tell me you didn't steal from your sister. Carlos looked at our mother, and for a moment I saw a flicker of the shame he should have been feeling all along. But instead of admitting guilt, he doubled down on justification. Mom, business is complicated. Emma built something good, but she's not equipped to take it to the next level. We were trying to help her transition to a role that better suited her ability. By stealing $43,000, Mom's voice was getting stronger, anger beginning to replace confusion. By forging her signature, by lying to clients about her stepping down. It wasn't supposed to be stealing, Roberto interjected desperate. We were going to structure it as advance payments against future equity distributions. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Advance payments against equity you were planning to redistribute without my consent. That's not business, Roberto. That's fantasy. You can't steal money and then retroactively call it a loan. The conversation was interrupted by my phone buzzing. I glanced at the screen and saw a text from Janet. Emergency, call me now. Excuse me for a moment, I said, stepping into the kitchen to take the call. Emma, we have a problem, Janet said immediately. I've been monitoring their communications, and Carlos just sent an urgent message to their attorney. They're planning to file an emergency restraining order against you tomorrow morning. My blood ran cold. On what ground? They're claiming you've been using private investigators to harass them, and that you're threatening to file false criminal charges unless they surrender their equity stakes. They want to freeze all business operations until a court can review the ownership dispute. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of their desperation and cunning. Even cornered, they were still trying to outmaneuver me through legal manipulation. There's more, Janet continued. Carlos also contacted 3 of your biggest clients tonight. He told them that you're having a mental health crisis and that the company might not be able to fulfill their contracts. He suggested they consider alternative contractors for their projects. The audacity was staggering. Not content with trying to steal my company, they were now actively trying to destroy it by spreading lies about my mental health and reliability. What do you recommend? I asked. Strike first. We file criminal charges tonight, before they can get their restraining order. Once there's an active criminal investigation, their civil maneuvering becomes much more difficult. I thought quickly. Filing criminal charges would cross a line that could never be uncrossed. My family would face arrest, prosecution, possible prison time. But they'd already crossed their own line by trying to destroy my reputation and steal my clients. Do it, I said. File the charges. Are you sure? Once this starts, there's no going back. I looked through the kitchen doorway at Carlos, who was frantically typing on his phone while Roberto and Maria watched anxiously. They weren't showing remorse. They were planning their next attack. I'm sure. File everything. I returned to the dining room to find the atmosphere even more tense. Carlos looked up as I entered, his expression a mixture of defiance and calculation. Emma, we need to talk about moving forward constructively, he said. This family meeting has gotten out of hand, but we're all adults. We can resolve this professionally. Actually, Carlos, the time for professional resolution passed when you decided to file a restraining order against me tomorrow morning. His face went white. How did? The same way I know about your calls to our clients tonight, spreading lies about my mental health and suggesting they find alternative contractors. Maria gasped. Carlos, you didn't. I was trying to protect the company's relationships, Carlos said defensively. If this family dispute goes public, it could destroy our reputation, so you decided to destroy my reputation instead. I pulled out my phone and opened the recording app. Say that again. Carlos, tell me exactly what you told the Henderson family about my mental state. Carlos realized he was being recorded and clamped his mouth shut. But the damage was already done. His admission of trying to sabotage client relationships was exactly the kind of evidence that would support criminal charges for intentional interference with business relationships. Here's what's going to happen, I announced, putting my phone away. In approximately 30 minutes, Detective Morrison will receive a comprehensive file documenting 8 months of embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. You'll all be arrested within 48 hours. Roberto's face went gray. Emma, please, I have grandchildren. I can't go to prison. You should have thought about your grandchildren before you decided to steal from your niece. I replied coldly. Maria was crying openly now. This will destroy Mom. This will destroy our whole family. I looked at my mother, who was sitting quietly with tears streaming down her face, and felt a pang of guilt. But then, I remembered Carlos's recorded voice casually discussing how to manipulate me out of my own company, and the guilt hardened into resolve. You destroyed this family when you chose crime over loyalty, I said. I'm just making sure there are consequences. Carlos made one final attempt at manipulation.
Emma, think about what you're doing. Once you file criminal charges, there's no coming back from this. We'll always be the family that sent each other to prison. Is that really what Dad would have wanted? The mention of our father hit me like a physical blow, and for a moment I wavered. Dad had always emphasized family loyalty. Always taught us that blood was thicker than water. But then I remembered something else he'd said. Something that had guided me through every difficult decision in building my company. Dad always told me that integrity was non-negotiable. I said quietly. He said that people who compromise their integrity to help others eventually end up helping no one. You want to know what Dad would have wanted? He would have wanted his children to be honest, loyal, and trustworthy. You failed on all 3 counts. My phone buzzed with another text from Janet. Charges filed. Warrants will be issued tomorrow morning. I looked around the table one final time, at these people who'd shared my childhood, my dreams, my business, and ultimately my trust. They'd taken everything I'd given them and turned it into a weapon against me. The criminal charges have been filed, I announced. You'll be arrested tomorrow. But there's still one more thing we need to discuss. Carlos looked defeated, but he managed to ask, your termination from Rodriguez Construction. Effective immediately. I pulled out 3 termination letters I'd prepared weeks earlier, setting one in front of each of them. Your access to company accounts, vehicles, equipment, and facilities is revoked as of this moment. Your company credit cards are canceled. Your keys to our office and equipment are to be returned to my attorney by noon tomorrow. You can't fire us, Maria protested weakly. We have equity stakes. We have contracts. Your equity stakes are forfeited due to criminal breach of fiduciary duty. I explained. Your employment contracts contain morality clauses that are void due to your criminal conduct. You have no legal standing in Rodriguez Construction as of right now. Roberto was shaking his head in disbelief. 8 years of work, gone just like that. 8 years of my work, I corrected. You had 2 years of legitimate employment followed by 8 months of criminal activity. Those 2 years don't excuse the 8 months of theft. I gathered my documents and prepared to leave, but Carlos's voice stopped me at the dining room doorway. Emma, wait. What if we return the money? What if we make full restitution and walk away quietly? Would you drop the charges then? I turned back to face him. Carlos, you just tried to file a false restraining order against me. Tonight, you called our clients and lied about my mental health. Even if you returned every stolen penny, you've proven that you'll never stop trying to destroy what I've built. But we're family, Maria whispered. Family protects each other, I replied. Family builds each other up. Family doesn't steal, lie, and conspire to destroy what their own blood has created. You stopped being my family the moment you decided I was worth more to you, gone than present. I walked toward the front door, leaving them sitting in stunned silence around my mother's dining table. As I reached for the doorknob, I heard Mom's voice behind me. Emma, wait. I turned to see her standing in the hallway, looking older and more fragile than I'd ever seen her. I'm sorry, she said simply. I'm sorry they did this to you. I'm sorry I didn't see it happening. I'm sorry you had to handle it alone. The words broke something loose inside me, and suddenly I was crying for the first time since this whole nightmare began. Mom, I never wanted this. I never wanted to choose between family and justice. She pulled me into a hug, and I felt 8 months of tension and isolation finally starting to release. You didn't choose this, Mia. They chose it. You just refuse to let them get away with it. I know this is going to be hard for you, I said. The arrests, the trial, the publicity. I raised 4 children, she said firmly. 3 of them forgot the values I taught them. 1 of them remembered. I'm proud of the one who remembered. As I drove home that night, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. 8 years ago, I'd been a young woman with big dreams and no money, sleeping in my truck and living on determination. Tonight, I was driving away from the ruins of my family relationships, but I was also driving toward a company that was finally, completely mine. The criminal charges would move forward. The trials would be public and painful. My family would likely face significant prison time. But Rodriguez Construction would survive. And more importantly, it would thrive under leadership that valued integrity over profit and loyalty over manipulation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But for the first time in 8 months, I felt ready to face them. The woman who'd built a construction company from nothing had just proven she could defend it from everything. Part 4. The Aftermath. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of legal procedures, media attention, and the strange emptiness that comes after winning a war you never wanted to fight. I woke Wednesday morning to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. Most from employees who'd heard rumors about arrests and wanted to know if the company was stable. I called an emergency staff meeting for 10 a.m., gathering our entire team in the conference room that had once hosted monthly meetings with Carlos, Maria, and Roberto. Looking at the faces of people who depended on Rodriguez Construction for their livelihoods, I felt the full weight of responsibility that came with protecting what I'd built. I'm sure you've all heard rumors about legal issues involving some of our former management team. I began, choosing my words carefully. I want to assure you that Rodriguez Construction remains financially stable and fully operational. All current projects will continue on schedule, all paychecks will be issued as normal, and all client commitments will be honored. Mike, my lead foreman who'd been with me since year 3, raised his hand. Emma, are we talking about criminal charges here? Because some of the guys are worried about working for a company that might be under investigation. I appreciated his directness. Mike had always been straight with me, and he deserved the same in return. Yes, criminal charges have been filed against Carlos Rodriguez, Maria Rodriguez, and Roberto Martinez for embezzlement and fraud, I said clearly. But those charges relate to their theft from the company, not any wrongdoing by the company itself. Rodriguez Construction is the victim here, not the perpetrator. Jennifer, our newest project coordinator, looked confused. But weren't they owners of the company? How can owners steal from their own business? That's actually a great question, I replied. When someone has a fiduciary duty to act in the company's best interests, they can absolutely commit crimes against that company. What they did was steal money, forge documents, and plan to fraudulently transfer company assets. The fact that they held equity stakes makes their actions worse, not better. Dave, Mike's longtime partner, shook his head in disgust. 8 months they were stealing. How much money are we talking about? Over $40,000 in direct theft, plus additional damages from their attempts to sabotage client relationships, I answered. But all of that money will be recovered through restitution orders as part of their criminal sentence. The room buzzed with quiet conversations as the team processed this information. I let them talk for a moment, before continuing. I want to be completely transparent with all of you. The next few months will involve criminal trials, media attention, and probably some difficult questions from clients and competitors. But Rodriguez Construction has never been stronger financially or more secure legally. We own our equipment, our office, our reputation, and most importantly, our integrity. Sandra, our office manager who'd worked closely with Roberto on accounting, raised her hand tentatively. Emma, what happens to our benefits? Roberto handled all the insurance and retirement planning. Sandra, great question. I've already contacted our insurance broker and retirement plan administrator. Everything remains in place, but I'll be taking over all financial oversight personally. We're also hiring a new CFO within the next 2 weeks, someone with credentials from outside the family. The meeting continued for another 30 minutes, covering practical questions about project management, client communications and operational procedure. By the end, I could see the relief on everyone's faces. They'd been worried about losing their jobs, but instead, they were hearing about stability, growth, and professional management. After the staff meeting, I drove to our biggest active job site, the Henderson family's custom home project. Tom Henderson was waiting for me, having requested an emergency meeting after hearing about the arrests on the morning news. "Emma, I need to know what's going on," Tom said without preamble. "Carlos called me Monday night, saying you were having some kind of breakdown. Now I'm hearing on the news that he's been arrested for stealing from your company." I sat down on a stack of lumber and gestured for Tom to join me. The morning sun was warming the job site, and the familiar sounds of construction work provided a comforting backdrop for what I knew would be a difficult conversation. "Tom, I'm going to tell you everything, because you deserve to know the truth," I said. "For 8 months, my brother Carlos, my sister Maria and my uncle Roberto were systematically stealing money from Rodriguez Construction. They were also planning to fraudulently take over the entire company and dissolve it to avoid their debts." Tom's eyes widened. "Jesus, Emma, how much money?" "Over 40,000 in direct theft, plus they were planning to steal assets worth more than $1 million through fraudulent corporate restructuring. And Carlos called me saying you were having mental health issues." Carlos was trying to destroy my reputation and steal my clients as part of his takeover plan. He wanted you to think I was incompetent, so you'd be comfortable transferring your project to his new company. Tom was quiet for a long moment, processing the scope of the betrayal. "How long have you known about this?" "I suspected something was wrong about 2 months ago. I hired a private investigator who documented everything over 8 weeks. Monday night was the first time I confronted them directly, and they're really going to prison. They're facing multiple felony charges: embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy, forgery. They're looking at significant prison time." Tom shook his head in amazement. "Emma, I've been in business for 25 years, and I've never heard of anything like this. Your own family stealing from you and trying to steal your clients." "Neither had I admitted. "But the important thing is that your project is completely secure. Rodriguez Construction owns all the equipment, employs all the workers, and has all the expertise needed to complete your home exactly as planned." "What about financing? Will this affect your ability to pay suppliers and subcontractors?" I pulled out my phone and showed him our current bank balances. "Tom, we're actually in better financial shape now than we've been in months. The profit margins that were declining due to theft are now back to normal level. We have more than enough cash flow to complete all current projects and take on new ones." The conversation continued for another hour, with Tom asking detailed questions about project timelines, quality control, and long-term company stability. By the end, he seemed satisfied that Rodriguez Construction would not only survive, but thrive in the aftermath of the family crisis. "You know what, Emma," Tom said as we prepared to leave the job site, "I'm actually more confident in Rodriguez Construction now than I was before. Someone who can discover theft, document crimes, and pursue justice while maintaining professional operations. That's the kind of business owner I want to work with." Similar conversations took place with our other major clients over the next few days. The initial shock and concern gave way to increased confidence, as clients realized they were working with a company that prioritized integrity and accountability over family politics. The media attention was more challenging to manage. The story of a family construction business torn apart by embezzlement and conspiracy had all the elements that local news outlets loved: family drama, criminal activity, and a strong female protagonist who'd fought back against betrayal. I gave one carefully prepared interview to the Denver Business Journal, focusing on the company's stability and growth plans, rather than the personal details of family betrayal. The article that resulted emphasized Rodriguez Construction's financial strength and commitment to ethical business practices, helping to reinforce client confidence and attract new business opportunities. The most difficult part of the aftermath was dealing with the emotional fallout. Despite everything they'd done, Carlos, Maria, and Roberto were still my family. The media coverage meant that friends, neighbors, and business associates throughout Denver knew about the arrests and criminal charges. Every social interaction became awkward. Every business meeting, included unspoken questions about family loyalty and trust. My mother struggled the most with the public attention. She'd always been proud of her children's business success, and suddenly that success was overshadowed by criminal behavior and family conflict. I made sure to visit her twice a week, helping her process the guilt and confusion she felt about her other children's actions. "I keep thinking I should have seen the signs," she said during one of our conversations. "How could they plan something like this for months without me noticing anything?" "Mom, they were experts at manipulation and deception," I replied. "They fooled me for months, and I worked with them every day. You saw what they wanted you to see, loving children building a family business together. But I raised them. I taught them values. How did they forget everything I tried to teach them?" It was a question I'd been asking myself repeatedly. How had the siblings who'd shared my childhood, my dreams, and my business turned into people capable of such calculated betrayal? I didn't have good answers, but I'd learned that sometimes understanding why people hurt you is less important than protecting yourself from further damage. 2 weeks after the arrests, I received a call from a criminal defense attorney representing Carl. He wanted to discuss a plea bargain that would involve full restitution in exchange for reduced charges and minimal prison time. "My client is prepared to return all stolen funds, plus interest," the attorney explained. "He's also willing to provide testimony against his co-conspirators if that would be helpful to the prosecution." I found the offer both predictable and disgusting. Carlos was trying to reduce his own consequences by betraying Maria and Roberto, the same way he'd betrayed me when he thought it would benefit him. "Tell your client that the plea negotiations are between him and the district attorney. I'm not interested in helping him reduce his sentence by throwing my sister and uncle under the bus. Ms. Rodriguez, your brother genuinely regrets his actions. He was under significant financial pressure, and he made poor decisions, but he's willing to make full restitution." "Your client had 8 months to show genuine regret," I interrupted. "Instead, he spent that time planning to destroy my reputation and steal my clients. His regret seems directly proportional to his legal exposure." The plea negotiations continued for several weeks, with all 3 defendants eventually accepting deals that involved significant restitution, community service, and suspended prison sentences contingent on their compliance with strict probation terms. While part of me wanted to see them face full prison sentences, I was relieved that the trials would be relatively brief, and that the stolen money would be returned quickly. The most satisfying development came 6 weeks after the arrests, when I received a call from a reporter at Colorado Construction News. They wanted to feature Rodriguez Construction in an article about businesses that had overcome significant challenges through strong leadership and ethical practices. "We're particularly interested in how you maintained operations and client relationships during such a serious family and business crisis," the reporter explained. "It's unusual to see a company emerge stronger after something like this." The article that resulted portrayed Rodriguez Construction as a model of resilience and integrity, emphasizing our growth in both revenue and reputation following the family crisis. The piece generated significant positive attention from potential clients and industry professionals, leading to 3 new major contracts within a month of publication. Standing in my office 6 months after that confrontational family dinner, I looked out at the Denver skyline and reflected on everything that had changed. Rodriguez Construction employed 52 people, up from 47 before the crisis. Our revenue was on track to exceed $4 million for the year. Most importantly, every employee, client and supplier knew they were working with a company that valued honesty and accountability above all else. The woman who'd started with nothing but a pickup truck and a contractor's license had learned that building something worthwhile sometimes requires tearing down what's corrupt, even when that corruption comes from the people you love most. It was a painful lesson, but one that ultimately made both me and my company stronger. Part 5: The New Foundation. 8 months had passed since that confrontational family dinner, and Rodriguez Construction was thriving in ways I'd never imagined possible. The crisis that was meant to destroy my company had instead refined it, burning away the corruption and leaving behind something stronger and more valuable than before. I stood in our expanded office space, watching through the conference room windows as our new CFO, Patricia Chen, conducted the weekly financial review with our department head. Patricia brought 30 years of corporate experience and a forensic accounting background that ensured nothing like the previous embezzlement could ever happen again.
Her meticulous financial controls and transparent reporting had not only protected our assets, but also attracted new investors who appreciated working with a professionally managed construction firm. The team assembled around the conference table represented the growth and professionalization that had followed the family crisis. Besides Patricia, we now employed Jennifer Martinez as our Director of Business Development, replacing Carlos's role with someone who built client relationships through competence rather than manipulation. Kevin Thompson had taken over marketing and communications, bringing digital expertise that far exceeded what Maria had provided while maintaining absolute ethical standards in all client interaction. Our project management team had expanded as well, with 3 new supervisors who'd been attracted to Rodriguez Construction specifically because of our reputation for integrity and professional excellence. Word had spread throughout the Denver construction industry that we were a company that honored contracts, treated employees fairly, and delivered quality work without the drama that plagued many family-owned businesses. The financial numbers told the story of our transformation most clearly. Revenue for the current year was projected to exceed $5 million, nearly double what we'd achieved during the chaos of family conflict. Profit margins had stabilized at healthy levels now that money wasn't being siphoned off through unauthorized withdrawals. Most importantly, our cash flow was strong enough to support the expansion plans I'd been developing for months. Those expansion plans centered around something I'd been considering since the early days of building the company: creating opportunities for other women in construction. The betrayal by my family had taught me the importance of building professional relationships based on shared values rather than blood ties. I wanted Rodriguez Construction to become a launching pad for women who faced the same skepticism and barriers I'd encountered when starting out. The first step in that vision had been hiring Sarah Williams, a recent graduate from the Colorado School of Engineering who'd struggled to find opportunities with other construction firms. Sarah brought fresh perspectives on sustainable building practices and energy efficiency that were increasingly important to our residential clients. Under my mentorship, she'd quickly developed into one of our most valuable project engineers. "Sarah, how's the Morrison project coming along?" I asked, joining the weekly meeting as it wrapped up. "We're actually 2 days ahead of schedule," Sarah replied with obvious pride. "The new solar panel integration is working perfectly, and the client is thrilled with the energy efficiency projection." This was exactly the kind of innovation and excellence I'd hoped to foster by building a team based on merit rather than family connection. Sarah's technical expertise, combined with Kevin's marketing skills and Jennifer's client relationship management, had created a dynamic that was producing better results than I'd achieved even during the best periods of working with my family. After the meeting, I returned to my office to review the proposal I'd been developing for weeks: the Rodriguez Construction Women's Fellowship Program. The idea was to create internships, mentorships, and eventual equity partnerships for women entering the construction industry. The program would provide technical training, business development support, and access to the networks that were often closed to women in our field. The fellowship program represented more than just business expansion. It was my answer to the question of how to prevent future betrayals while building something meaningful. Instead of relying on family ties that could be manipulated or exploited, I wanted to create professional relationships based on shared commitment to excellence and integrity. My phone rang, interrupting my review of the fellowship proposal. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but I answered anyway. "Rodriguez Construction, this is Emma." "Ms. Rodriguez, this is Detective Morrison. I wanted to update you on the status of the criminal cases against your family member." 8 months later, I still felt a complex mix of emotions whenever the legal proceedings came up. Justice had been served, restitution had been paid, and the criminal behavior had been definitively stopped. But the cost had been the complete destruction of family relationships that had once meant everything to me. "What's the update?" I asked. "All 3 defendants have successfully completed their community service requirements and are current on their restitution payments," Detective Morrison reported. "Carlos and Roberto have both found employment outside the construction industry. Maria has moved to Phoenix and appears to be complying with all probation terms. Any violations or concerns?" "None. They seem to understand that any further contact with you or your business would result in immediate incarceration." After hanging up, I sat quietly in my office, processing the strange closure that came with knowing my family members were successfully serving their sentences and staying away from my life. The woman who'd once shared Sunday dinners and business dreams with them now received updates about their lives, through police reports and probation officers, but the sadness of that loss was balanced by the excitement of what I was building in its place. The fellowship program would launch within 6 months, funded by Rodriguez Construction's strong profits and supported by partnerships with local engineering schools and trade organizations. The first class would include 4 women who'd shown exceptional promise in construction-related fields, but had struggled to find opportunities for advance. More immediately, I was preparing to announce the promotion of Jennifer Martinez to senior partner, making her the first person outside my family to hold equity in Rodriguez Construction. Jennifer had proven herself through 18 months of exceptional client relationship management and strategic business development. Her partnership would be based on performance metrics and contractual obligations rather than family ties, a much stronger foundation for long-term success. That afternoon, I drove to the job site where everything had started 8 years earlier, the small residential addition that had been Rodriguez Construction's first major project. The original clients, the Patterson family, had called me recently about an extensive renovation that would essentially rebuild their entire home. "Emma, we can't imagine working with anyone else," Mrs. Patterson had said when offering me the contract. "You've always been reliable, honest, and professional. After hearing about all the drama you went through with your family, we're even more impressed with how you've handled everything." Standing in the Pattersons' backyard, looking at the addition I'd built with my own hands when Rodriguez Construction was barely more than a dream, I felt the full scope of the journey I'd traveled. The woman who'd started with a pickup truck and a contractor's license had survived family betrayal, criminal conspiracy, and public scandal to build something more valuable than I'd ever imagined possible. The sound of my phone buzzing brought me back to the present. A text from my mother: "Saw the article in Denver Business Journal about your expansion plans. So proud of what you've built." Dinner Sunday. My relationship with my mother had slowly healed over the months following the arrest. She'd struggled with guilt and confusion about her other children's actions, but she'd never wavered in her support for my decision to pursue justice. Our Sunday dinners had resumed, though they were quieter now, focused on the future rather than rehashing the painful past. "Dinner sounds perfect," I texted back. "I have some exciting news to share about the fellowship program." As I drove back to the office, I thought about the story I would tell when the fellowship program launched. When reporters asked about the inspiration behind creating opportunities for women in construction, I wouldn't focus on the betrayal or the criminal charges or the family relationships that had been destroyed. Instead, I'd talk about the importance of building businesses on foundations of merit, integrity, and shared values rather than blood ties and misplaced loyalty. The woman who'd once believed that family was everything had learned that chosen family built through professional respect and shared commitment to excellence could be even stronger than the family you're born into. The empire I was building now would be based on contracts rather than trust, performance rather than promises, and accountability rather than forgiveness. Rodriguez Construction had become more than just a successful business. It was proof that sometimes the best way to honor what your family taught you about values is to hold them accountable when they forget those values themselves. It was demonstration that a woman who builds something from nothing can defend it from everything, even when the threat comes from the people she loves most.
Looking ahead, I saw opportunities for growth that extended far beyond construction projects and profit margins. The fellowship program would create a network of women professionals who shared a commitment to changing an industry that had been resistant to female leadership. The partnerships I was developing with engineering schools and trade organizations would create pathways for the next generation of women builders. Most importantly, every woman who joined Rodriguez Construction through the fellowship program would learn the same lesson that had saved my company: that success built on integrity is the only success worth having, and that protecting what you've built sometimes requires the courage to fight for it against impossible odds. The family meeting that was supposed to end my career had instead become the beginning of something much larger and more meaningful. They'd tried to vote me out of my own company, but I'd ended up owning everything and using that ownership to create opportunities for women who faced the same barriers I'd overcome. Standing in my office that evening, looking at the architectural plans for our expanded facilities and the fellowship program proposal that would soon become reality, I realized that the greatest victory wasn't surviving my family's betrayal. It was building something so strong and valuable that their betrayal ultimately made me unstoppable. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new women ready to prove that construction might be a man's world, but it was also a world where the right woman with enough determination and integrity could build an empire that would last for generations. 2 years had transformed everything about Rodriguez Construction, but the most dramatic change wasn't visible in our expanded headquarters or our doubled workforce. It was the quiet confidence that came from knowing I'd built something that couldn't be stolen, manipulated, or destroyed by anyone who thought they understood me better than I understood myself. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our new executive conference room as I prepared for what would become one of the most important meetings in my company's history. Across the polished granite table sat representatives from Denver Municipal Development reviewing our proposal for the largest public works contract in the city's recent history, a $30 million infrastructure project that would establish Rodriguez Construction as one of Colorado's premier commercial builders. "Rodriguez," said Margaret Chen, the city's procurement director, "your company's growth trajectory over the past 2 years has been remarkable. Revenue increasing by 300%, workforce expanding from 47 to 112 employees, 0 safety violations, and client satisfaction scores consistently above 95%. These numbers tell a story of exceptional management and operational excellence." I nodded, feeling the weight of what those numbers represented. Each percentage point of growth reflected nights spent perfecting bid proposals, mornings walking job sites before sunrise, and the careful cultivation of a team that shared my commitment to building something meaningful. More importantly, those numbers represented the distance I'd traveled from the woman who'd trusted family loyalty over professional competence. "The growth has been intentional and sustainable. We've focused on building systems and partnerships that can handle increasing complexity while maintaining the quality standards that define our reputation." David Martinez, the city's chief engineer, leaned forward with obvious interest. "Tell us about your approach to workforce development. We're particularly impressed by your fellowship program for women in construction." The Rodriguez Construction Women's Fellowship Program had exceeded every expectation I'd held when launching it 18 months earlier. What started as a way to create opportunities for 4 women had evolved into a comprehensive pipeline that was reshaping gender dynamics throughout the Denver construction industry. Our first fellowship class had produced 2 project managers, who were now overseeing major commercial development, 1 structural engineer who'd designed innovative solutions for 3 significant municipal projects, and 1 entrepreneur who'd launched her own specialty contracting firm with Rodriguez Construction as her anchor client. "The fellowship program addresses a fundamental market inefficiency," I explained. "The construction industry has traditionally excluded half the available talent pool through cultural barriers and institutional bias. By creating structured pathways for women to develop technical expertise and leadership skills, we're accessing capabilities that our competitors overlook." Margaret made notes as I spoke, clearly intrigued by the business logic behind what many in the industry had dismissed as social activism. "And the results have been measurable." "Absolutely. Our fellowship participants have contributed to patent applications for 3 construction innovations, led client relationship management, that's resulted in 8-figure contract renewals, and developed safety protocols that have been adopted industry-wide. The program doesn't just create opportunities, it generates competitive advantages." The conversation continued for another hour, covering technical specifications, timeline requirements, and the collaborative approach we'd take with other contractors and municipal departments. But underneath the professional discussion, I sensed they were evaluating something more fundamental: whether Rodriguez Construction had the institutional stability and leadership depth to handle a project that would span 5 years and involve coordination with dozens of other organizations. "There's one more topic we'd like to address," said Margaret as the formal presentation concluded. "Your company experienced significant leadership changes 2 years ago. Can you speak to how those changes have affected operational stability?" The question I'd been expecting finally arrived. The criminal proceedings against Carlos, Maria, and Roberto had been public record, covered extensively by local business media and construction industry publications. Every major client conversation for the past 2 years had eventually touched on the family crisis that had nearly destroyed my company. The leadership changes resulted from the discovery that 3 former equity holders were engaged in systematic financial fraud, I said direct. Their removal was necessary to protect the company's assets and reputation. Since then, we've implemented financial controls and governance structures that make similar misconduct impossible, and the impact on operations. Removing individuals who were actively sabotaging company performance had an immediate positive effect on our operations, I continued. Our profit margins improved by 43% once the embezzlement stopped. Our client satisfaction scores increased when we eliminated the conflicts of interest that had compromised previous business relationships. Most importantly, we attracted exceptional talent who were drawn to working for a company that prioritizes integrity over personal relationships. David nodded approvingly. We've actually heard from several other contractors about the caliber of people you've been able to recruit. That kind of talent acquisition is unusual in our industry. After the municipal development team left, I remained in the conference room, looking out at the Denver skyline and reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this moment. The $30 million contract we'd just pitched represented more than business growth. It was validation that Rodriguez Construction had become the kind of company I'd always envisioned, built on merit rather than manipulation, sustained by competence rather than family connection. My assistant knocked on the conference room door, interrupting my thoughts. Emma, you have a call from Rebecca Thompson at Colorado Construction News. She's doing a follow-up story on women-owned businesses that have achieved significant growth during the economic recovery. Rebecca Thompson had covered the Rodriguez Construction story from the beginning, writing the first major article about the family crisis and criminal charges. Her follow-up pieces had documented our growth and the success of the fellowship program, helping to establish our reputation as an innovative company that was changing industry dynamics. Rebecca, good to hear from you, I said, accepting the call. What's the focus of this new piece? I'm exploring how women business owners have leveraged recent economic conditions to build market share and influence, Rebecca explained. Rodriguez Construction is obviously a standout example, but I'm particularly interested in the leadership lessons you've learned. What would you tell other women who are facing significant business or family challenges? The question required me to distill 2 years of growth, conflict, and transformation into actionable insight. The most important lesson is that loyalty without accountability is just enabling dysfunction, I said after a moment's thought. I spent years believing that family relationships required me to tolerate behavior I'd never accept from employees or business partners. Learning to apply the same standards to everyone, regardless of personal relationships, was essential for protecting what I'd built. Can you elaborate on that? When someone's actions threaten your business, your employees, or your clients, the relationship you have with that person becomes irrelevant. Family loyalty doesn't excuse embezzlement. Personal affection doesn't justify sabotage. The people who truly care about you will support you in protecting what you've built, not demand that you sacrifice it to avoid hurting their feelings. Rebecca asked follow-up questions about the fellowship program, our growth strategies, and my advice for women entering male-dominated industries. But the conversation that stayed with me was about the evolution of my understanding of loyalty and accountability. The woman who'd once believed that family came before business had learned that business success made it possible to support family, while family dysfunction could destroy everything you'd worked to create. That afternoon, I drove to the job site where our latest fellowship participant, Jessica Rodriguez, no relation despite the shared surname, was overseeing her first major project as lead superintendent. Jessica had joined the program 6 months earlier with a civil engineering degree and 0 construction experience. Under the mentorship structure we'd developed, she'd quickly demonstrated the technical competence and leadership ability that made her perfect for managing complex commercial developments. How's the timeline looking? I asked, joining Jessica as she reviewed the daily progress reports with our subcontractors. We're actually 3 days ahead of schedule, Jessica replied with obvious pride. The electrical work finished early, which means we can start the interior framing tomorrow instead of next week. Watching Jessica coordinate with electricians, plumbers, and framers, all men with decades more experience, I saw the future of the construction industry. Her authority came from competence, not connection. Her leadership was respected because it was earned through knowledge and results, not inherited through family relationships. The client seems pleased with the progress, I observed, noting the positive interactions between Jessica and the property development team. They are. Mr. Patterson specifically mentioned that working with our team has been the smoothest construction experience his company has ever had. He's already talking about Rodriguez Construction handling their next 2 projects. This was exactly the kind of relationship building that sustained long-term business growth. Clients who trusted our competence and professionalism became advocates who recommended us to other developers, creating a referral network that generated new opportunities consistently. The success of the fellowship program had attracted attention from construction companies throughout Colorado and beyond. I'd received calls from business owners in Texas, California, and Michigan who wanted to implement similar programs. More significantly, 3 major construction firms had approached me about licensing our training methodologies and partnership structure. These licensing opportunities represented a potential revenue stream that could fund expansion of the fellowship program while spreading our approach to workforce development throughout the industry. The woman who'd started with a pickup truck and a contractor's license was now positioned to influence how an entire industry recruited and developed talent. Evening brought the monthly dinner meeting with my mother, a tradition we'd re-established after the family crisis had settled into manageable routine. Mom had struggled with guilt and confusion about Carlos, Maria, and Roberto's actions, but she'd gradually found peace with the idea that supporting my decision to pursue justice had been the right choice. The newspaper article about your municipal contract bid was very impressive, Mom said as we shared dinner at her favorite restaurant. $30 million, that's more money than I can even imagine. It's a significant opportunity, I agree. But more importantly, it represents the kind of work that can employ our fellowship participants for years while building infrastructure that benefits the entire community. And if you get the contract. When we get the contract, I corrected with a smile, Rodriguez Construction will be positioned to take on projects anywhere in the western United States. We'll have demonstrated the capability to handle large-scale municipal work, which opens doors to state and federal contracts. Mom was quiet for a moment, processing the scope of what I was describing. Sometimes I think about your father, about what he'd say if he could see what you've built. The mention of Dad brought the familiar mix of sadness and determination I felt whenever I thought about his absence from my journey. He'd died just as Rodriguez Construction was becoming successful enough to support real growth. He'd never seen the company become profitable, never met most of our current employees, never witnessed the fellowship program or the major contracts that had established our reputation. I think he'd be proud of the integrity part, I said finally. He always said that success without integrity was just sophisticated failure. Everything we've built is based on doing the right thing, even when it's difficult. He would definitely be proud of that, Mom agreed, and he'd be amazed by how many people you're helping. The women in your fellowship program, the employees who depend on Rodriguez Construction for their family's security, the clients who trust you with their projects, that's a lot of lives you're impacting positively. The conversation continued over dessert, touching on topics that ranged from business strategy to personal relationships, to the ongoing challenge of balancing professional success with emotional fulfillment. But the thread that connected everything was the recognition that building something meaningful required constant choices between easy and right, between comfortable and necessary. Later that week I received the call I'd been expecting since the municipal development meeting. Margaret Chen's voice was professional but warm as she delivered the news that Rodriguez Construction had been awarded the $30 million infrastructure contract. The selection committee was unanimous, Margaret explained. Your technical proposal was excellent, your pricing was competitive, and your track record of completing complex projects on time and under budget was decisive. But what really set you apart was the workforce development component. The city is excited to partner with a company that's actively creating opportunities for underrepresented populations in construction. The contract signing ceremony took place the following week in the mayor's office, with representatives from local business organizations, construction industry associations, and women's professional groups in attendance. As I signed the documents that would guide Rodriguez Construction's operations for the next 5 years, I thought about the distance between this moment and the garage where everything had started. The woman who'd once slept in her truck to save gas money was now signing contracts that would employ over 100 people and contribute to infrastructure that would serve Denver residents for decades. More importantly, the company that had nearly been destroyed by family betrayal had become a model for how businesses could succeed while creating positive social impact. Standing at the podium to address the assembled group, I looked out at faces that included current employees, fellowship participants, municipal officials, and business competitors who'd become collaborators on various projects. These were the relationships that sustained Rodriguez Construction professional partnerships, based on shared commitment to excellence, rather than family connections that could be manipulated or exploited. This contract represents more than business growth for Rodriguez Construction. It validates an approach to business that prioritizes competence over connections, merit over manipulation, and integrity over expedience. The infrastructure we'll build will serve this community for generations, but the workforce development partnerships we'll create will change how this industry operates, permanently. The applause that followed felt different from the polite recognition typical of such events. It was the sound of people who understood they were witnessing something significant, not just a successful business transaction, but the demonstration of principles that could reshape how organizations created value for all their stakeholders. After the ceremony, I drove to the original Rodriguez Construction office, the small space in an industrial building where I'd first hired employees and signed my first major contract. The building was scheduled for demolition to make way for a mixed-use development, but the current tenants could remain until construction began in 6 months. Walking through the empty space where I'd spent countless 18-hour days building something from nothing, I felt the weight of everything that had changed. The desk where I'd drafted my first employee handbook was gone, replaced by storage for the painting contractor who'd rented the space after Rodriguez Construction moved to larger facilities. The conference room where I'd held weekly meetings with Carlos, Maria, and Roberto was now used by a small accounting firm, but the energy of those early days remained, the excitement of building something meaningful, the determination to prove that competence could overcome skepticism, the vision of creating opportunities for people who shared my commitment to excellence. That energy had sustained me through family betrayal and public scandal, driving the growth that had transformed Rodriguez Construction into the kind of company I'd always imagined it could become. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica Rodriguez. Finished the Peterson project today. Client wants to schedule a meeting about their next development. This job site management thing is pretty addictive. Reading her message, I smiled at the recognition that the cycle was continuing. Jessica was experiencing the same satisfaction I'd felt when completing my first major project, the same drive to take on increasingly complex challenges, the same vision of building something that would last. The fellowship program wasn't just creating job opportunities, it was replicating the entrepreneurial spirit that had driven my own journey. The drive back to our headquarters took me past several job sites where Rodriguez Construction crews were working on projects that ranged from custom residential homes to major commercial development. At each site, I saw the systematic excellence that had become our signature: detailed planning, careful execution, and the kind of quality control that generated referrals and repeat business. But more than technical competence, I saw evidence of the culture we'd built around shared values and mutual accountability. These weren't just employees working for paychecks, they were professionals who understood that their individual performance contributed to collective success,
that quality work created opportunities for everyone. That culture had been impossible to maintain when Carlos, Maria, and Roberto were undermining company operations through their criminal behavior. Their removal had allowed the true potential of Rodriguez's construction to emerge, revealing what was possible when everyone shared the same commitment to integrity and excellence. Standing in my office that evening, looking at the architectural plans for our next expansion and the fellowship program applications for our upcoming class, I realized that the greatest victory wasn't surviving family betrayal, it was building something so valuable and meaningful that their betrayal ultimately accelerated my success. The family meeting that was supposed to end my career had instead become the catalyst for creating something far more significant than a successful construction company. Rodriguez Construction had become proof that businesses could succeed by doing good, that competitive advantage could be built through creating opportunities for others, and that integrity under pressure was the foundation of sustainable success. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities, but I faced them with the confidence that came from knowing I'd built something that couldn't be stolen, manipulated, or destroyed by anyone who thought they knew me better than I knew myself. The empire I'd built on the ashes of family betrayal was stronger than anything I could have created through trust alone, because it was built on principles that couldn't be compromised and relationships that had been earned rather than inherited. The woman who'd started with nothing but determination and a contractor's license had proven that sometimes the best foundation for building something extraordinary is the rubble left behind when everything you thought you could count on falls apart. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.